all yours.
Thank you. We have the slides. Welcome, everyone. Now, this afternoon we have nearly 1.5 hours to talk about recovery. So I'm going to try and make this interactive, so it's not just me talking all the time to you, because you will fall asleep. So, first of all, I want to find out from you, is recovery something you talk about in Danish?
Yes.
Yeah? Is it in your government policy? Yeah? Do you use the word recovery, or do you use a Danish word? Recovery. You use... Is there a Danish word for it?
Yes.
Commissai. Oh, okay. Excuse my pronunciation. And how long has it been in your policy for?
Since 2002.
2010. And what do you, what does recovery mean to you? And do you want to say something? Yeah.
It's a person's own way, personal way to handle with mental illnesses,
yep.
To come back to life.
Yep. Right. Okay. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the personal process of recovery, but when I was in New Zealand and I had a job in the government, and my job was to help to define what recovery means in New Zealand. And so we had to say, well, if we're talking about the core of recovery is the personal journey, but of course we do not make this personal journey in isolation. We make it with our families and our friends and the services and wider society. And so in order to create a recovery-based system, we need to think about those things as well, not just about the individual journey. And so this afternoon I'm going to talk to you, and we're going to have a discussion about recovery, and I can probably look at that okay. So can you go, and the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is what is recovery? And you've already said what the core definition of recovery is. But as I said, we have to think about it as what are services, or what is society like, how do other people treat us, and so on. So the first question, this is a cartoon by an Australian woman. And this cartoon really sums up, to me, what a recovery-based system is like. And the person is asking this woman here, are you the driver or the passenger in your life? Can you? And she says, I think I've locked myself in the boot. You know, the car, the boot at the back where you put the luggage. And when we come into a mental health system, most of us feel like we've been locked in the boot. Okay, you understand? Now, the services I used, they said, oh, we need to get Mary out of the boot. But, oh, would they get me back into the driver's seat? No way. They wanted to drive and to have me as the passenger. Now, in a recovery-based service, the professional gets out of the driver's seat and they sit in the passenger seat. The person using the service, they drive, and the professional helps to read the map, passes the coffee, keeps them awake, you know, all those things that people in the passenger seat do. Okay? And that is a very clear image of what we mean the difference between a recovery-based service and a traditional service is who's in the driver's seat. Okay. Okay, next slide. Oh, now, there are many definitions of recovery, and if you have done any reading on this, some of the definitions would be so long I couldn't even fit them on that slide. So I like to keep it very simple. And the definition I've come up with is achieving the life I want in the presence or absence of my mental distress. Okay? So it's about me directing the life I want, and it may be that I have some distressing experiences at the same time, but I can still achieve the life I want. Okay? I don't have to wait to get rid of all my distress first to start thinking about and start, living towards the life I want. Okay? Right. Next one. But you see, as I said, we don't recover in a vacuum. And actually we need our own personal resourcefulness, our own inner resources. We need support from others. We need opportunities in our community and in our society. And sometimes we need services. But many people go through recovery experiences without services to help them. So services are not central to recovery, and they can do as much to hinder recovery as they can to help it. Now, the services I used, they hindered my recovery. They didn't mean to, they just did. They weren't bad people, they just didn't do it. They helped to keep me sick, all right? So, keep going. Now, in English, I don't know about Danish, but in English, recovery is a problem of a word because it has many meanings. I don't know in Danish, and one of the meanings is recovery from a physical illness. Like if I have influenza, I recover from influenza. If I have surgery, I recover from surgery. And this is a word that doctors use a lot, okay? And I always thought it's a big problem that we have used a word for this, what we call recovery. We use a word that doctors use. That's very confusing. So we need to distinguish between the word as doctors use it and the word as we use it in the recovery movement. Now, you'll see here, we have on one side, we have clinical recovery. That's what doctors do, okay? And then we have personal recovery. And you'll see there is a big difference between them, okay? Because in clinical recovery, what happens is you go along to a professional with a problem, you rely on their expertise to fix the problem, and when the problem is fixed, they say, you are now cured or you are better, and then you go away, hopefully. But in personal recovery, this is about me. After my life has been very disrupted by my mental distress, it's about me regaining a sense of self and becoming and life becoming meaningful again, and me taking up valued roles in my society and in my family and so on. And it is a process of personal growth. It's not an outcome of treatment, and I rely mostly on myself. I don't have to rely on professionals. They may help me, but I need to rely on myself and the people around me, okay? So now these two processes, they may be intertwined. They may go together. But it's possible to have personal recovery without clinical recovery, okay? Any questions about that? Now, I do have an offer because if you don't like to ask questions in English, you can ask them in Danish and then someone will translate them. Do you have any questions about this? Do you understand what I mean? Oh, good, that's all right then. Okay. Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide. Now, where did recovery come from? The sort of recovery that I'm talking about. Well, I want to talk about two things today. One is in the 1980s in America, some people started to use this word in a new way, in the way that I'm describing today. And there were people who were in the psychiatric rehabilitation. Do you have psychiatric rehabilitation here? Do you call it social psychiatry more here? Yes, more social psychiatry. And they said to themselves, oh, you know, we've been, we have these people, you know, putting things in packages every day, you know, and in sheltered workshops. And they started to think that may not be a good way to, treat people. So they said, we need a new way that is about people owning their own journey and being able to participate as citizens again. At the same time, there was the survivor movement. And there was a woman called Patricia Deegan. Who's heard of Patricia Deegan here? Oh, quite a few, yeah. Well, she started to write about recovery. And she wrote very eloquently about the personal journey of recovery. And she was involved with some of these social psychiatry people in America. And really, what she was saying was what the survivor movement had been saying all along. But she just had a nice banner for it, a nice word, which was called recovery. Then another thing happened in the 80s was that there were a number of long-term studies of people diagnosed with schizophrenia. Mainly, well, they weren't just American, some of them were European. A lot of these long-term studies their results started to come out. And there was one in particular from the US. They followed people up who had been in back wards. Do you have that expression? They're the wards where the hopeless cases go, you know, the really bad, you know, the people who are really, you know, considered to be very unwell and will never get better. They followed people from these wards over 30 years. And what they found was that actually nearly 2/3 of them were just getting on with their lives. And these were people who had been given up as hopeless cases. And other studies showed the same pattern. So then people had to start saying, well, maybe our pessimism about people with these major diagnoses was wrong, and we need to rethink it. So that was another influence that created the recovery movement. Now, the psychiatric rehabilitation people, they're a little bit different in the way they think about recovery than the survivor movement, because they're still very concerned about how do we help people overcome their limitations, okay? But the user-survivor movement, we don't focus on limitations. We just say people are free to do what they like. You know, if as free as any other citizen. We're not totally free, any of us, but so we've come up with a slightly different versions of recovery, and And the user survivor movement version is a little bit more questioning of the medical model and compulsory treatment and all those things. Any questions about that? Okay, you understand everything? Okay, good. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, recovery has been around for some time, since the late 1980s. And, we call it a broad church. There are many views within this recovery movement, if you like. Now, some people say, oh, we will just change our service, but all we'll do is instead of calling it a treatment plan, we'll call it a recovery plan, and they don't change anything else. Well, that's not recovery to me. Then there are some people in the middle who say, oh, well, the system does need some adjusting. Well, it needs more than a little bit of adjusting to me. Well, you see, I'm sitting over there in the corner that says the system needs radical change, okay? And I'm going to show you my own vision for the radical change that the system needs. It won't happen in my lifetime, but I'm still working on it. So, can we have the next slide? So, why do we need recovery? Well, next slide. This is the running of the bulls. Now, I don't want to be racist about the Spanish or anything like that, but I love this picture because it says tradition. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. Okay? So we keep doing things that are incredibly stupid. And how many things happen in the mental health system that are incredibly stupid? Heaps. A lot. Okay? Next slide. Now, one of the reasons we need recovery is because of what I call the fading life chances story. Your life chances just get less and less and less. And this was the story I got when I went into mental health services. They said, you have a predetermined life path that you have no control over. Well, that's a great message, isn't it? They said, oh, well, you weren't always sick, but it was in your genes, in your genetic material, and it was just waiting to pounce on you when you were about 18, okay? And then you got symptoms, then you got into real trouble and got into the mental health system, so we diagnosed you. And then, when our treatments failed, we called you chronic. And once we called you chronic, you were lost. There was nothing, you had no life chances left. You were just going to be on the pension, drinking instant coffee, on sofas, smoking cigarettes, making baskets for the rest of your life, okay? Gee. Well, you can see now that wasn't true what they said about me, but they believed it was true at the time. And this is a terrible story to give anyone. And people are still giving this story to people. So we need another story, don't we? When people come into the mental health services, we don't need to give people this story, we need another story, okay? So that's one reason why we need recovery. Next slide. There are some terrible individual outcomes, especially for people who don't manage to get out of the mental health system. Some terrible individual outcomes. We know that people die 10 to 25 years younger than average, okay? In Australia, and this will be true, this will be largely true in Denmark as well. These figures are the same for every Western country. But in Australia, 70% have no work of any sort, not even voluntary work. 85% rely on government pensions for their income. Then, now this is not such a big deal in Europe because many people don't own their house in Europe, I think. But in Australia, well, and New Zealand, it's very important to own your own house. And 87% don't own their own house. But look at this. 4 out of 5 are not in any relationship. And half of the women never have babies, and 3/4 of the men never have children. Now, some people don't want to be in relationships, some people don't want to have babies. But if you look at a whole population group with these kinds of figures, you must be worried, okay? And I don't think people are nearly worried enough about this, because if they were, we'd have a completely different looking system. Okay, so that's one reason why we need recovery, because what we're doing now just does not work. And you can see by these outcomes. Okay. Now, the thing is, when you look at the way at services, they cost a lot of money, and they do it, and they're very ineffective. Now look, now this one, the top thing here, one guy looked at all the longitudinal studies, all the long-term studies of people who'd had schizophrenia from 1880 onwards. And what he found was that recovery rates hadn't changed in that time, okay? And even, you know, this great drug revolution we had in the 1950s, where they developed these lovely antipsychotic drugs that were killing us, they didn't make any difference to recovery rates on a population level. The only thing that made a difference, according to this man, was fluctuations in the labour market. So that when jobs were easy to get, the recovery rates went up. When jobs were hard to get, they went down. So what do you say from that? The best therapeutic intervention might be to get someone a job, okay? How many people get assisted to get jobs in Denmark who use mental health services? 5%, 10%, 30%? How many? Huh? Not as many that get the drugs, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah.
It's not easy to put a percent on it,
Yeah.
but in the social psychiatry, we are all very aware of the recovery in having a job.
Good. Okay. So, and then a lot of you will know this, but in the World Health Organization, they did 2 studies. I didn't do one because the first study was so unbelievable to them that they had to repeat it. And the first study said they looked at people with a diagnosis of schizophrenia in several, low-income countries, poor countries, and then in several Western countries. And they looked at the outcomes for these people. And they found that actually people did better in the poor countries. So they were so shocked by this, they repeated the study, and they found the same thing. So that's another reason why actually we know that what we're doing isn't working very well. And then another thing that I don't know how topical this is in Denmark. Have you come across trauma-informed care in Denmark? Okay. Well, this is something that is very, very is very talked about in America in particular, because 50 to 90% of people who come into mental health services have a trauma history. You know what I mean by trauma? And usually what they call neglect and abuse in childhood, okay? Repeated neglect and abuse. And services don't just completely ignore these. Now, one of the things about a recovery-based system, is that it's very much about recognising and responding to people with trauma histories. Right. Now, another reason we might think about we need recovery is when we in the research that asks people themselves, not the professionals or their families, but people themselves, what helped your recovery? Well, this is what they come up with. They all say hope and other people believing in me was probably the most important thing. Now, you don't need 12 years at university to give someone hope. In fact, it seems to have the opposite effect sometimes. So, that people in these studies, they said, well, actually, I needed to believe in myself again, okay? And I needed to be able to manage my life, because when we have major mental distress, the coping skills we've developed don't work anymore. So we have to learn new ones. They talked about having good relationships with people that were respectful and supportive, where they could give as well as take. Income, well, it's pretty obvious that people talked about having a reasonable income. But people also talked about being able to make a contribution to society through work or going back to education or just having a hobby or doing something voluntary. And then, but when we, you know, the mainstay of our system is hospitals. What our system is really based on is not helping people to restore those things. It's based on, largely on hospitals, medication, and compulsory treatment. That is at the core of our mental health systems. We try and do other things, but really at the core of these three interventions, hospital, medications, and forced treatment. And when you ask people, did these things help your recovery? You get a very mixed response. You get people saying, some people say the medication helped, other people say it damaged me, and a bunch of people in the middle who say, well, it was helpful, but it was also damaging, okay? Then with the hospitals, many people feel worse. We know from the research that a lot of people feel worse after coming out of hospital than they did before. In forced treatment, we know that most people don't like forced treatment, okay? So we have a whole lot of approaches in our system that don't really help people with the things that are important to them. And if we designed a system that was based on what people say helps their recovery, we would have a very different looking system. Don't you think? Yeah? Okay.